Our transmission does have a shim on the bottom of the main shaft. It's a 30 thousandths shim. It's the factory one that the inside has been ground off because the PPG shaft is actually a larger diameter. So now the idea of the washer is bigger so that it fits onto the PPG shaft. My transmission pretty much sits like that. The 30 thou washer on the bottom is smaller than the amount that my counter shaft goes up when it's in the snap ring in the case. My cuff sits pretty much right in the middle, pretty close to fourth but doesn't touch. I also have another shim on the top. This shim was to get rid of the rest of my end play. When we assembled it with no shims at all, I think I had right around 62 thousandths, 65 thousandths of in and out. I tried to get rid of that as much as possible. I think now I have about 4 to 6 thousandths in and out. The reason you don't want a lot is because the shaft can move obviously up and down. So when you're shifting, you don't want the gears to be able to run away from your shift fork. The other thing is the gears can float. This bearing presses on the collar and presses everything down and keeps everything nice and tight. So in play, obviously, you want very minimal, but you don't want it so tight that it's going to take out the bearings. Setting up a ball bearing diff is obviously a lot easier because we have straight cut gears now. We don't have a lot of load from side to side, so the tapered bearing diff is not really necessary anymore. The ball bearings seem to be just fine as far as strength. I haven't seen them fail. Usually you break them yourself, either installing them or taking them apart or something else. The reason we have ours shimmed up is, like I said earlier, we're trying to get the ring gear to ride in the middle of the pinion. The pinion gear is taller than the ring gear itself. We want to have a little bit of meat, top and bottom. So I have it shimmed up. The smallest shim for a ball bearing that Honda makes is 39 thou. That's what's sitting in the bottom right now. My total was obviously not big enough to run another shim on the top, but too big to leave it. So I actually have a 8 thou shim between the diff and the bearing, and I roll no shim in the case. This gives me right around 6 thou of in play, or I can put a 6 thou feeler gauge in between the case and the bearing, but I still have the diff up. In doing that, I did have to clearance the case just a little bit. I clearanced it more than I need to. The one that it actually touched on was this brace. Normally you wouldn't have that. The diff sits a lot lower, but because I'm trying to get the diff on the pinion as best as possible, this is a modification I had to change. You can also see now that I have the diff in there, the part that I cut off of the case gives a lot better access to oil slinging in to feed the counter shaft. Now we have everything assembled. One thing to note is I leave the detent ball out on the shifter rod. I want to be able to see where the detents want to be in comparison to actual gear engagement. Right now I'm in the neutral position. As you can see, my 1-2 shift fork is right in between the gears. It does favor one a little bit. There's not really much I can do about that. I have it shimmed as best as possible so that the teeth engage. As far as travel of the shift fork, I really only care that it engages all the way into first, into second, third, and fourth, and that when I'm in neutral, it's nowhere near the dog teeth and it's just free floating. I do have that even though it favors first gear. So the first thing I want to do is go slide over to the 1-2 shift fork. This arm was hitting here before. I had to grind a little material off so that it'll travel all the way over and clear the 3/4 shift fork to get to the 1-2. Okay, so now I'm into first gear. As you can see, the sleeve is all the way down. Can't go anymore. It's pretty much bottomed out. I have full first gear dog tooth engaged. Nothing sticking out the bottom. That's pretty much what I want. The whole tooth is buried. Now I'm in second gear. You can see the second gear is all the way up, fully engaged. You can't see any of the dog teeth. That's pretty much what you're looking for. I'm in third gear here. Third gear, I didn't have any problems with this setup, getting all the way in. The tranny was pulled apart this time because we couldn't get into third. The reason was third gear shift fork was bent up from either all the hits going into third and bending a little each time. This is a new OEM shift fork. Goes in just fine. We're going to be producing 3/4 shift forks that won't bend, and you won't have that problem anymore. The way you set it up is the way it'll be. Go straight up, shift into fourth. Fourth on this time was engaging about that far before. The reason was this piece was not ground off yet. It was bottoming out right here, and I couldn't engage any higher. Same with second, they're both the same position. After grinding this, I was able to travel all the way up. I have full fourth gear engagement, plenty of room. The other problem was the detent in this position on the shifting rod. Wanted to bring fourth gear back to about half engagement. That's where it thought fourth gear should be. So the new detent spot was ground back farther so that the ball wants to hold it all the way engaged into fourth. The same was done on this detent. Alright, so now that we've gone through the whole transmission, made sure I have enough travel to get fully engaged into all the gears. No dog teeth are partially exposed. That's pretty much what we're looking for. All my shimming was an attempt to get rid of excess end play in the shafts, and it's also an attempt to line up the gears as best as possible so that they have as much tooth to grab onto. I don't want anything overhanging. How it's shimmed right now is pretty much how we're going to run it. Just a recap of things that we've done. Obviously I shimmed the diff up to try to get it into the pinion for a better position. I've removed some of the case for oiling purposes. I've drilled the oil orifice bigger to try to promote more oiling to the pinion bearing and the pinion shaft itself, since it feeds from the middle of the shaft. The main shaft has been shimmed up in no excess of the amount of travel that the counter shaft goes up from the snap ring, so that my collar doesn't rub on fourth. I got another shim on top to get rid of my excess end play and hold the shaft down in position. Still running factory shift forks for now. The first time we ran the transmission, we were on Redline MTF. We've switched to Torco's RTF. Ran it in there probably the past 2 months, 4 or 5 trips to the track on it, and tearing it down, everything looks pretty good. As it sits right now, that's kind of our oil of choice. I don't see any excess wear in any ways. So if it's not broken, we're not going to change it for right now. There are a few different oils out there. As these trannies become more and more popular and more guys are running it and using different oils, what works the best will kind of come to the surface. As of right now, we're using this. It seems to work really good. That pretty much